All right, and welcome everybody to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 127 here of the Enough to Keep Going podcast on the E2KG network. This is our game experience show for the week of January, let's call it January 21st. So, somewhere in that week, we are recording and talking about the games that we are playing every week on the E2KG network here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. We'll come at you with either our game experience show, and in the other week, we'll be talking about the deep dive, or dive into news. Last week, you guys had a great discussion related to some of the news over the first few weeks of the new year. It's relatively, you would think it would be a slow time for news, but there is a lot that's been going on, and you guys, I'm glad that you guys covered it last week. I'm sorry that I could not be here to join you. So, but tonight we have another small crew, and joining us tonight is the man himself, Agasicles and DBqHams. How are you, sir?
All right, this is my first show for 2020.
Well, congratulations. It is we are all over the map here with our shows so far in 2020, but that's okay. It's a new decade. We can take a new approach. So 2 weeks ago, Osiris Prime and myself, we gave us an assignment to go back a decade, back to 2010, and look at some games that came out that year and see how their game design still holds up. So 2010, we were mid-cycle, maybe a little later than mid-cycle in terms of Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. It had not quite been. We knew something was on the horizon, but we were still kind of right in the heart of that gaming generation. The Wii was still pumping out hits and churning out money, and the DS was actually still a platform along with the PSP. So I had a chance to go back at that time in 2010. I was a PC gamer, I was a Wii gamer, and a DS gamer. So I was not in the generation of the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 until later, which also meant that I had plenty to catch up on. And so what I want to do before I dive into some of the games that I played is I want to look through the list here. I'm shuffling it, ruffling it for the listeners at home. There's a ton of games that came out in 2010, which is obviously there's a ton of games that come out every year. But I'm gonna run through the games here, run through some of these games here, Agasicles, and I want to see. Feel free to jump in anytime that you have one that stands out to you. So we get early in the year, we get something like the original Darksiders, we get the original Bayonetta. We had the Telltale game Poker Night at the Inventory. Donkey Kong Country Returns comes back from Retro Studios. Pac-Man Championship Edition came out in 2010, along with the NBA Jam revival that came to the platforms. We also get Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Mafia 2, Call of Duty Black Ops, Halo Reach. We get Red Dead Redemption, Alan Wake, Mass Effect 2. We get some smaller games that made a splash, things like Bit Trip Runner.
Well, the interesting thing about the Mass Effect, so that was Mass Effect 2 for
For
PC
PC
and
at
Xbox, having
360.
previously already
Yep.
released on PlayStation.
No, it came out a year. It came out later in the year on PlayStation.
Ah, okay,
Yep.
all right.
It came out later. It was bundled with two or three of the
Oh,
DLCs.
that's
It was
that's
bundled
right.
with.
I'm sorry. It started off on 360 and went to PlayStation. Sorry, I had that
Yep,
backwards.
because Mass Effect the original was a PC and Xbox only
Right.
game as
All
well.
right.
Yep. We get some small games that have made a lasting impact. I would say things like Limbo, things like Super Meat Boy. We also get some visual games like Heavy Rain that came out. Metro 2033 came out. We got the Just Cause 3 or Just Cause 2, Skate 3. We get some big hitters on the PC in StarCraft 2 and Civ 5. And then we get a couple things that have fallen by the wayside, but still are fondly remembered by some people, like Alpha Protocol, Enslaved, Vanquished, which is the Vanquish coming back for a remaster here. Fallout New Vegas also came out that year. On the PSP, as I was saying, this was kind of their last hurrah for the PSP. You had Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and the DS was in the heat of its popularity because you had Dragon Quest IX that came out on the DS as well. So, lots of games. I was really surprised actually how many of those games from 2010 have either seen re-releases or have seen through the Xbox backwards compatibility program that they are still games that are able to be played, relevant to play in the year 2020.
Yeah,
So that being, go ahead.
did you mention BioShock 2 in your
Oh
rundown?
no, I did not. BioShock 2. That's right. BioShock 2 came out. Thank you. Yes.
What's really weird and interesting, looking at this, is lots of February releases. Which
Mm-hmm.
we've talked in the last few years, and I mean myself included. I mean, feeling like, um, Horizon Zero Dawn and Resident Evil, and that there's been this resurgence of dropping games in February, but it was going on, back then. Star Trek Online,
Yep.
like we said,
Yeah, that was a winter kind of early year release as well,
it was
wasn't it?
February also. Bioshock 2. Yeah, so I guess the last SOCOM on PSP.
Mm-hmm.
Dynasty Warriors came out in February. As you mentioned, Heavy Rain, that was a February release. So
Yep.
lots of stuff programmed into February back then.
Yes, very much so. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
No, and then of course the MLB games. Unfortunately, I think that this was the year of the last MLB that came out on PSP. As I've talked about before, that was one of my favorite places to play MLB because you could take it with you on the go. So
Yep.
it's very
Yeah,
interesting.
MLB 15 was the last one on the Vita. Yes, but I agree that those are good games to play on the go.
Yeah.
Um, a game that came out. I mean, some of these are interesting because if you're an Xbox Live, Xbox Gold member, some of these have been things that have been offered up free over the years. Things like Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, um, things like Toy Story 3 was just offered up this past year. Toy Story 3 being the game by Avalanche Studios, which would go on in the decade to make the Disney Infinity franchise, to then later get shut down. Um, so some things there, things like
So
yeah, go ahead.
when I can't believe, so they actually made Tom Clancy's Hawks 2.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Oh yeah, Hawks. That's right. Oh, that makes me think of Mag was also in this year.
and it was also a
Yep.
February release.
There you go. Yep.
And
Massive action game for those
yes,
of you following along.
yeah.
Yes. But we did also get some really solid, long-lasting first-person shooters like Metro 2033. Battlefield Bad Company 2 came out this year. Um, right? That there's some pieces and some good games there as well. Halo Reach was also a game that came out in the year of 2010, and then also found its PC release in the year of 2019. So, um, lots of games. I spent my time going back and looking at some of the Wii games that came out that year because I had a Wii, and so it was fun to kind of dig back some of those games back out, or grab them from my local library and play them. So I played some of these are big name games that have been released and re-released on other platforms. Things like Kirby's Epic Yarn and Donkey Kong Country Returns have both seen iterations or kind of ports to the 3DS during the time. Mario Galaxy 2 also was kind of it was a spring release. Um, and that game still really holds up. It's solid Mario platforming with a little helping of motion control in there if you can stomach it. Um,
A few
go
failures,
ahead.
a few failures on here too. A few bad memories.
Oh
Unfortunately,
yeah, no, right? I mean, my list here is not completely is not all the greatest hits.
right?
It is a sampling of games. So I also played um, Metroid Other M as somebody who pre-ordered this game and sold it 2 days after playing it. Um, the action in it, going back to it and revisiting it, the storytelling still is is just appalling and abysmal. Um, but the action still works, right? I think that one of the things that really turned me off to the action back in 2010 was kind of the switching between the holding the Wiimote sideways and just treating it like a an NES D-pad, and then having to point at the screen every once in a while because this was the Wii and that was the thing to do, but point at the screen to shoot missiles. And so that still is not a helpful uh, gameplay. It takes you out of the rhythm of what is actually not a bad action game if you could strip out all the story and just play the game. I played for an hour. I remembered why I didn't like it, and I remembered what I did like about it. The same thing is true that I played Red Steel 2 for a good 90 minutes to 2 hours and remembered how much I enjoyed that game at the time. So this is. Go ahead. What are
Yeah,
you
no,
gonna say?
no, the unfortunate thing is, so of course by this time I had gotten rid of my Wii. You mentioned that it was still going strong. My personal feeling was this 2010 was about the time that we hit the tip over point, and there was a realization for, I think for some gamers that like the Wii was not like the core gaming platform that it was cracked up to be or that we had wanted. By then, third-party support had eroded in the face of the very very incredibly high first-party attach rate to the Nintendo Wii, and it's Red Steel 2 brings back some memories or missing memories in that like Red Steel was what I wanted from the Wii, and
Hmm.
we didn't get more games like that, like in high volume. So unfortunately, by the time Red Steel 2 came out, I was already out from the platform. So how did you enjoy that experience in comparison to the original?
So the Red Steel 2 itself is actually a pretty solid game. The original was a launch game. It had a lot of kind of waggle and the idea was that you were, it was sword and gun. Um, and Red Steel 2 was one of the early games that had the um, Wii Motion Plus attachment. I actually, in order to play this again, I had to sit through a 3-minute video about how to attach and unattach the Wii Motion Plus to my existing Wii controller and making sure I have my wristband on. But the game itself is what it feels like after playing it now in after VR. It feels like the start of a VR shooter, right? I mean, because what you end up doing is you're pointing at the screen to aim your gun, and then you have pretty close mapped motions to be able to reflect a bullet, slash overhead, sideways, slash stab forward with your katana, and that feels very much like playing a kind of a corridor shooter or a room to room type of game in VR where you're doing kind of the same thing. And Red Steel 2 does that. It's you're in kind of a spaghetti western kind of samurai western town, but you're moving from kind of alley to alley and load screen to load screen. So they only kind of they corridor you in, so there's never too many enemies coming at you at once. So the control mechanism can keep up with it, but it's also exactly what a lot of kind of wave-based shooters or kind of elementary uh, action games in 3D in VR tend to do as well, right? Is that they give you a defined space, you have some set of mapped real life motions, and then you're kind of moving through that world in either a point to point type of method. So playing it again after playing a number of VR games over the last couple of years, I could see kind of the design elements here that some of this stems from. So that's on the plus side of using some Wii Motion controls. The Sin and Punishment Star Successor. So this is kind of the follow up to the N64 treasure game of Sin and Punishment, which was only released in Japan. It's similar to, let's go back to something like Forgotten Worlds or Space Harrier, in that kind of genre, and it's another reminder of how inaccurate the Wii pointer was as well, to some degree, when you're trying to get a headshot in, or you're just kind of making sure that you move it around the screen and keep shooting at the same time. I think your point about this is kind of the end of the Wii in terms of its good games. I would say that is true. Right? We kind of fall off a cliff after this year in terms of going strong, in terms of there were a number of strong first party releases, but you're right that the third party releases had kind of dried up. In 2009 you had a couple, but really the sales were never there and people started to abandon it. One of the third-party releases that still kind of came out, thank you, Ubisoft, is No More Heroes 2, right? So we've got Travis Touchdown returning maybe this year with No More Heroes 3. So I went back and picked up and played No More Heroes 2. It's okay, right? It is a relatively simplistic action game with a lot of Pseudo 51 style to it, but a lot of and maybe I mean, remember it feeling this way, and the press kind of talking about it in terms of its sexist kind of machismo, and the fact that we're getting skirt shots and looking down at open bras, and a lot of kind of objectification in there, and kind
Yeah,
of
but in some
go ahead.
ways, I mean, so in some ways, this proves the validity of the assignment, right? Like, part of the validity of the
Yes. Oh,
assignment
exactly. Right.
was,
That some
I'm
things hold
sorry,
up and some things don't.
right?
Yeah.
Well, and it's also to go back and kind of revisit and expose for discussion these really large deltas between where we were at the opening of the decade and where we are now at the end. Some of your mentions and critiques of like the Wii is a thing that we can say now in hindsight, having used thing. I mean, the reality of the VR experience, which you and I have both participated in on different platforms, is that it's half being in the visor, but the other half is the motion controls. And so you got part of what we experience now in VR via those motion controls on the Wii. Of course, now we look at them through the hindsight of having played on Oculus Rift, having played on HTC Vive, having played on PSVR, and the increased accuracy, the near one-to-one approach that the current day VR systems make in comparison to Nintendo's original motion control implementation is just wildly improved. It sometimes makes us wonder because there's not a lot of discussion of the lineage of that VR experience being drawn
Mm.
back to the Wii. In reality, from a socio and cultural and technological and technology standpoint, it definitely does. Right, you definitely have to trace its roots back to, or at least pass through that point in time of the Wii. And then, as you mentioned, with like the presentation, and we've talked about other things like Borderlands 2 and other games that are coming before. The reality is, console generation 8, in a lot of ways, it's was the last generation where that type of stuff is tolerable, and wasn't called out. Whereas it still gets done a little bit today, but it's immediately cited and talked about. I mean, part of that is the rise of social media and the
Mm-hmm.
increased, frequency and rapidity of conversation that happens around video games. What's weird is that so Bayonetta is spawned out of this time period, clearly a very sexualized character, but that character has survived and transitioned, and doesn't get called out as much for those things. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to maybe pick that apart at some point and try and figure out like why does that work, and maybe it's because we do desire female empowerment, and Bayonetta is a very strong character, so maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some there. I mean, the first game I can remember, the whole, super move where Bayonetta would lose her clothes and her hair becomes her clothing, that getting called out for. But at the same time, some of that was toned down a little bit in two, but also you had some things that weren't. But I think you're absolutely right. Part of the reason that it continues is, well, I'll say maybe two reasons that it continues. One is the empowerment piece, that there is some objectification, but there is more to that character. It is not simple just objectification for image and object sake. And also, I think in some ways, Nintendo including Bayonetta in Smash Brothers in helps soften that image, because Smash Brothers does not over sexualize her in a way that maybe the original game did. And it introduces Bayonetta to a whole range of players who may not have had that experience with that character. And so there is some ways that by co-opting it into a game where you're playing with Mario and Yoshi and Donkey Kong, suddenly this character becomes more family friendly, even if that's not its original origins. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the interesting piece of this is to look at that comparison, where some of the narrative pieces like No More Heroes or Metroid Other M fall in terms of their gender roles. Look at places where the gameplay of Red Steel, you see the introductions of some of our um, uh, future games in VR. You see the lineage of things like Toy Story 3 with Avalanche, that Mario Galaxy 2, uh, Epic Mickey, Warren Spector's game was also out this year. Man, that art style still holds up on the Wii. The downside is that Wii doesn't have dual analog sticks, right? To try to move in a 3D space with dual analog with only the D-pad on a Wii piece. But again, the strong art design in something like Epic Mickey or Epic Yarn allows for those games to hold up as well. As Epic Yarn was just a 3DS release last year.
So help me out now. So does Epic Mickey have any touch points in terms of its history with Kingdom Hearts?
No, so Epic Mickey was kind of its own little world. Warren Spector, as a Disney fan, went back, and this is where they kind of re-earthed Oswald, who was an early Disney character around the time of Mickey and kind of got, you know, not used again after that early animation. And he brought him back as a character in like the land of forgotten cartoons or forgotten creatures or something like that. So no, it has no legacy to the Kingdom Hearts stuff. Although this year we also would have get in 2010 Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep on the PlayStation on the PSP. Again, another reason why having dual analogs is beneficial, as those games are still out there and being part of the Kingdom Hearts collections that continue to get re-released every once in a while. So I mean, I think the other piece of the 2010 discussion is how some of these games how some of these franchises, right, are still relevant last year, this year, that when um, Outer Worlds came out, there's a lot of conversation around Fallout New Vegas in terms of that comparison, that we're, you know, Halo Reach being just re-released to PC. Call of Duty Black Ops is now. Who would have thought in 2010 that Black Ops would be the dominant, that Treyarch would be the dominant developer of the Call of Duty franchise, and that is what has sold. We've had news stories over the past month in terms of the top 10, top 20 games of the decade, and what, 8 of the top 12 are Call of Duty games. So that there's the legacies there, and so yeah, I think in some ways a lot of things that still hold up, uh, um, but also there are definitely some pieces here where time has not been generous, that game design has evolved, and so it was a fun experience. And I think that in the practice of doing this, there's certainly some things that I have not gotten back to that I want to, right? I want to go back and play a little Civ 5, play a little StarCraft, see how some of those things hold up as well. So I know that you did not get to this assignment, but you talked a little bit about. You want to toss out Shadow Tactics? Does it harken back to an earlier time in terms of PC design,
A
or
little
do we
bit.
want to use that as part of our what you've been playing, diving into our games?
It could be kind of a bridge, I guess.
Let's go with that.
You know, it's unfortunately as far back as I got in my backlog, um, and I've been struggling with some decision making about programming my content for the stream and what types of games I wanted to play. This unfortunately was kind of my last hurrah for dedicated backlog play in some aspect. Uh, but I did go back to it. It's a 2017 game, I think. Late 2017, I think. So, and it does harken back a little bit because there aren't a ton of, mouse click, squad based kind of tactical games. Their heyday was earlier in the decade with games like Sudden Strike, through that whole series. My favorite type of game like this was Fallout Tactics, which was earlier in probably the century. That may have actually gone back to the aughts. But there used to be more games like this, and they've definitely been on the decline.
Tactics is definitely thoughts. Yeah.
Yep. But I had a good time while I was playing it. Unfortunately, when the game first came out, it's one of those games that I played, put my first few hours into, and then didn't get back around to, and kind of just has kind of sat around in my backlog for a while. It's a little different from some of the squad-based tactical games. I guess it also reminds me, if we, just talk about how certain themes are kind of littered throughout the decade. And I always get this wrong. And Swiss always calls me on it. I don't know if this is Valkyrie Chronicles, but there is a World War II era kind of like fantasy squad-based tactical turn-based game that I played the demo of on the 360. That this is kind of similar to, although this isn't turn-based. So this does happen predominantly in real time. There are certain things that you can do. Well, it's weird, and it's going to be interesting to see if the Final Fantasy VII system is like this. It's kind of turn-based, but kind of real time. But like when you set things in motion, while you are moving, things can occur. Like you can be like, if somebody detects you in transit, like that happens in real time, right? It doesn't wait till the end of your move, and then and then units are patrolling as you're sitting waiting to move. So I don't know. It's hard to describe. You can kind of, I guess it's real time overall. But there are certain things you can do that do kind of stop the action for a second. There's a shadow, I can't remember what they call it, but there's like a shadow stealth mode that you can go into where you click, I think, the left shift button, and that does pause the action and allows you to basically allows you to put character actions in a queue. And so you can hit that button, basically pause the action, put the action for one character in the queue, hit it again, things run in real time, switch to another character, hit it, put their actions in a queue, then you hit the enter key, and then all of them then execute those actions like simultaneously. So it's the way that you use to get the characters to collaboratively engage on one objective at the same time. So it's a very small cast of characters. I think maybe 6 total, or maybe 5. But basically, it has a tank kind of character, it has a couple stealth characters, and then the stealth characters, one will have a ranged attack, but another won't have a ranged attack. One can throw throwing stars, one can set traps. Then there's one that's a sniper, who is great when you have him on the battlefield, but he can pretty much do nothing but snipe. He's not going to be good engaging in hand-to-hand combat. So and then there's a little bit of progression in terms of they sometimes get access to additional abilities throughout the course of the missions. I guess the one thing that I didn't like, and I didn't play too far towards into the mid game and end game because this might change at that point, but one of my big things is I don't like in RTSs What I don't like is I don't like the canned constraints where they say, hey, here's this mission and here's this objective, now only do it with these 3 units. We've given you access to 12 different types of units, but for this mission you only get 3. I'm like,
yeah, kind of tying your hands so that you can't creatively problem solve.
Right, and I'm like, well, who decided that I would only get these 3 units, right? Why can't I decide what 3 units I get? So there's a little bit of that where, like, they only give you certain characters and they give you, like, extra pieces of equipment, but then they don't let you use other pieces of equipment and things like that. So there's a little bit of that, but overall, it's a really fun game. It's it's nice to kind of stack those actions and then and then hit enter and kind of sit back and watch them pull it off simultaneously. It is very brutal and punishing in some ways. And you really, and I mean, the developers tell you in tutorials and stuff, but at the end of the day, this is not a thing that you're going to pull off elegantly. Like, you think about something kind of like Mirror's Edge, and you have those sections of a level that you're just on it, right? And you flow from one action to the next, and it's beautiful and it's beautifully executed, and if you record it, it looks great in playback, right? That's not this game. Like, you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail numerous times, and it gets to be a little bit of a grind because you just hit points where you're just trying to clear like one objective. Like, for instance, like there's a level that I just played where you're transiting across the map, and all of these have to be done in stealth mode. There is no like open assault mode option really. Any attempt to do so, you're going to get overwhelmed. So there's this one part of a level where, in order to transit across the map without being detected, you have to climb into this cart that's going to the town's like shopping center. Well, when the cart, and you can only get on the cart when it stops, and you can only get off the cart when it stops. Well, in the course of its route, it only stops in 2 places. So you have to get on in one. The place where it stops the second time is where you have to exit the cart. Well, when it stops, 2 guards approach the cart from either side. So it's in the midst of these guys moving that you have to exit the cart.
Oh wow! Yeah, how do you make it out?
Yeah, so it's you literally have microseconds of opportunity, and basically the way I got around it was I had both. I'm trying to remember. There's a point where one guard gets there just like a couple seconds before the other. So it's before the first guard gets there, you can get one off the cart and get them into the bushes very quickly. Then the split second later, where both guards turn around and start walking away from the cart, you can get the second character out and get them into the bushes quickly. But this is a series, like, if you watch the recording, it's like fail, 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 reload, fail, reload, fail, reload. So, whereas in other games that fail reload cycle encompasses like the course of a level, this literally is like an 8-second window of gameplay that you're just constantly hitting reload and reload and reload because you fail within that window. So
is the control tight enough that window feels achievable, or is that part of its
there are probably
failure or struggle?
There are probably a couple points on each level where the speed and fluidity that you have to accomplish that task, in my opinion, is very highly complex. Like, there are definitely moments in time where I pull a thing off and I'm like, well, I doggone sure couldn't do that twice, So it's just the nature of the game. Like I said, there's probably only 2. I mean, other things require a good amount of skill. That thing where like you literally have a microsecond to get it right, that only happens like a couple times per level. But like I said, when it does happen, you're going to be reloading a bunch of times until you get it right. So
what else have you been playing other than the frustration and the reload and the challenge of getting just the right lineup of action?
Yeah, well, as we get into the rundown here, part of my story is what I was half playing or not playing. So we alluded to this a little bit in the end of the into the end of the year episodes. But part of what I went through is I got into Star Citizen, right? So I launched the whole deep undercover investigative reporting last January, and was the person who decided to go in, into the belly of the beast, and kind of we talked and ragged on Star Citizen for.
And then you got some Stockholm syndrome.
right. And so I was playing that game, and then I was playing other games when that game crashed on me, and I felt was too unstable. And so a lot of what I've been going through since last November, which I think I finally resolved, is I mentioned on a couple episodes before that I went through this a little bit with Falcon 4.0. And Falcon 4.0 was a wonderfully beautiful flight simulator that was way ahead of its time in 1999, exceeded any flight sim that had ever come before. It was super highly complex, had a dynamic campaign, and so anytime you played the campaign, it unfolded differently every time. Missions were dynamically spawned. Things that when you accomplished a mission, the next follow-on mission in whatever campaign you were in might be a mission you weren't even flying, but it might have, you taking out a SAM site may have allowed another mission to then go in and bomb a target. It was a wonderful game. It was incredibly unstable, and frequently the do loop was that I would go up, I would fly a mission for 2.5 to 3 hours. I would be damaged. I would, make it back to base. I would try to land. And your landing tolerance was often within plus or minus 5 to 10 miles per hour of landing speed, right? And outside of that window, the airplane would crash, right? Well, unfortunately, in Falcon 4.0, often when you crashed, the game itself also crashed, wiping out and erasing that 2.5, 3 hour investment of time. And so you would reload the campaign. What had just unfolded, in your reality would not have happened. My level of addiction to that game, though, was such that many times, and I was in grad school the first time when I was exposed to this game, I would have studying to do. I would have other things I would need to do. But what I would do is I would play that mission all over again in an effort to recoup that time. And sometimes the exact same thing would happen a second time. Now on a Saturday, right, or sometimes even during the school week, I would have occupied 5 to 7 hours of time trying to eke some gameplay experience value out of this game.
Trying to get it to work.
Right, or hoping and praying that it would hold together, right, and save my progress. So what I realized was the same thing was happening with Star Citizen. I would play the game, a crash would happen. Instead of going to bed or going to do something I needed to do, I would try and play, another mission. This would often have me awake until 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes later, and I would just be, now, fortunately, in my previous job, the nature of what I was doing was such that, and I can function on very small amounts of sleep. That job, I was able to keep up, right? It was painful, but I was able to keep up. I've since transitioned into a job where my commute's longer, the peer group I'm around is different. I cannot do that. And so as I turned the corner into this year and started that new job, I started to realize that the same thing I had experienced with Falcon 4.0. And what happened with me with Falcon 4.0 is I got to a point where I said, this game is not healthy for you. You need to put it away. And I switched my approach to gaming at the time and got out of it. Just created some new thresholds about when a game does this, you can't keep plugging away at it. It had been almost 2 decades since that experience, and I was missing the signals that I was suffering from the same problem. And with Star Citizen, I put DCS, Digital Combat Simulator, on here also. What was then also happening was I would play Star Citizen, it would crash. I would play Star Citizen, it would crash. I would say, man, I really want to play something, a simulator. I would have my flight control system hooked up. And so I would say, well, I should load Digital Combat Simulator. And I would sit there, and if I was on a PC where it wasn't installed, I would download it and install it, and then I would boot it up, and then I would play it. DCS it's the most complicated flight sim that's out there now. It's getting the joystick and flight control system and keyboard mapping down is several hours of work when you're doing it the first. I would sit there and like configure all the keys and everything, and then try and fly a mission. And again, at this point, it was ridiculously late at night, and so all of that stuff I packaged up like in January, and I said like this cannot be what you do.
It's like the video game equivalent of the sunk cost fallacy, right? You're just gonna keep playing.
Right, and it's funny because I have railed against this whole thing of like labeling gaming as an addiction and all this kind of stuff. I was like, again, there are things that fall into that category. I think in my behavior with these specific games or this genre of game or this genre of game when it exhibits a certain behavior in conjunction with it being a certain thing. Now, the fact of the matter is that Star Citizen by design represents a magical unicorn that has never been pulled together before. And when it runs, I've made this analogy before, it's the golf swing, right? I'm a horrible hack as a golfer, but if I go out and I play 7 holes and everything's horrible, when I hit that one beautiful drive on hole number 8, I go, man, I'm ready for another 10 holes, right?
Yep.
Now, and then
you feel that ping, you feel everything just reverberates, right. And like, okay, I can do this again.
Right. So that's been the story of about 3 months of my gaming life. I have since walked that back and reprogrammed how I'm going to approach, this year of live streaming and gaming. Gaming to, plumb experiences to come here to talk about on the podcast. It has radically changed my view from what I thought this year was going to be. I was kind of out of the whole Xbox Series X race. I was out of PS5. I was like, I think I'm going to do MMOs and blah, 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 blah. So it took some getting through, but I think,
So can we unpack that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I can understand backing out of the kind of the Star Citizen kind of that aspect of trying to recoup your experience. Where in that kind of backing out did you decide that the MMO direction was not the direction you were going to go? And then also, how do those decisions help you decide that you're going to be back in the hunt for the next generation versus the PC path that you thought you were going to be on?
Yeah, a lot of it is because what I had isolated down on with MMOs is that what was attractive to me about it were these long form progression models. We've talked a lot in the last 2 years about progression models and that becoming a thing that I think all of us are highly interested in unpacking with any new game. What I was attracted to was this notion of, part of me landing on MMOs as a solution to another problem that I had identified in 2019 in gaming was the hard part with the way we play games. All of us, I think, maybe except for Prime because he plays a little bit differently than we do, but we're constantly onboarding with a new game. Like every 2 weeks, we are going through that onboarding experience. And for people who don't do this professionally and don't do this full time, that is a strain. Like, because there's time and like part of the thing with me with streaming is I sometimes struggle with I used to do what I used to call first boot episodes, which I'm like, I got a new game. There's no rehearsal. There's no prior like grooming of my system. We're putting the game in, we're going live, we're putting the game in, and we're hitting, we're double clicking for the first time or selecting the icon for the first time. And a lot of times there's a struggle, right? A lot of times there's what am I supposed to be doing here? What is going on? And I was hitting that like every couple of months. That was a drag and strain on my time and how much enjoyment I got out of gaming. And yes, it's good research, but man, it's impacting, right? So one of the the MMO thing I had come around to thinking I'm gonna invest in a smaller number of games. I'm gonna hook into these long form progression models, and then once I've onboarded with that game, I don't have to go through that again. But as I hit this bump with Star Citizen, what it caused me to do is it just caused me to reevaluate and think about all the things that like I enjoy with gaming. A lot of that is the multiple platforms, right? Is the enjoyment I get out of not only playing on PC, not only playing on Xbox, not only playing on PlayStation. and the coverage that we provide on the podcast, right? It's I think, as I was coming around this too, I was also hitting the point where I finally got the holiday episodes posted and was listening to them, and I was like, man, but between the four of us, plus Jet Force Vela, like, we played all of the games that, like, you hear, right?
Yep.
Like, so we listen to these professional podcasts of people who do this full time. We've played almost all of this. We've definitely played everything major that they talk about that's of any pertinent significance and relevance to most of the average game. Great Scott, we played Disco Elysium last year, right?
Yep.
Whereas as that thing went up for awards, most gamers hadn't even heard of it. So I just really thought about, like, how much I enjoyed that experience. And it's already getting me excited again for Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. Now, I will admit, tonight I was listening to another podcast and they mentioned the fact that, if you go back and calculate how much money you spent on PlayStation 5, on PlayStation Plus, if you've been paying into PlayStation Plus since the launch of the PS4, and it's about $420, and I'm like, that's a video card, right? That's another console. So I almost briefly was like, maybe I'll rethink this PC only thing again. But mainly it's because I just, I figured out the problem with only investing in MMOs and only being invested in those long form progression models is where I do get FOMO, and having done this before, I'm pretty sure it would happen again, is I don't like getting to the end of the year and not being part of that GOTY discussion, right? Not having the awareness and the direct experience of, we talk about the show, and what do we say? That we discuss games as an industry, as an art, and as a socio-cultural dynamic. And that's MMOs, that's a part of it, but, like, if you're not watching how things are evolving, it's like you're not participating in it as much. So I guess that's best as good an answer to your question as I have.
Yeah, no, that works a lot, right? I mean, that's definitely, those are all the bigger questions posed there in terms of how we keep up with what we do, of why we choose to kind of dip in and out of games, of kind of sample a whole lot, but not necessarily dive in and specialize. I think that has been something that I've struggled with here as well. And so for me, part of it is that I grew up renting games, so it's easier to dive in and out and to kind of sample. But at the same time, that long-term progression piece, when I played 10 years ago, I was playing Lord of the Rings Online and loving it and listening to Lord of the Rings Online podcasts. And that was my jam. And that was the main game I played. So I can appreciate the desire and the reward, the satisfaction that can come with something. The progression model piece is actually, I'm going to jump into some of what I've been playing because it dovetails nicely. And this January, looking for something new to kind of pick at, and I picked up. Well, I didn't pick up. I downloaded Dauntless. So Dauntless is the Monster Hunter like game owned by Epic Studios, right? That this is on. It's on all platforms, and it's crossplay across all platforms. So many other players of Fortnite and other games have come to this beautiful reality, but it was a joy, right? To sitting in front of my TV watching something and playing Dauntless on my Switch, then going downstairs and playing Dauntless on my PC, and later on then booting up when somebody else needed to use the computer, booting up Dauntless on my Xbox, and all playing with my same character, continuing my progression.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. Yeah. So it is. I knew it was cross play, but it is also cross progression. So it's a single account sign.
Yes,
that
it's cross progression.
Okay.
The only differences are you can on PlayStation 4 you can opt in to crossplay, or you can stay in your walled garden, and then the premium currency that you can buy is only cross-platform for Xbox and PC. So if you pick something up on Xbox, you have that currency on PC. But I bought like the I bought the intro pack on Xbox and on Switch, for $5 because I want to support the devs. I've enjoyed my experience so far. It's a free to play game. Here's a little something. But my currency on Switch does not carry over to any other platform as well.
So now, if you buy the currency on Xbox or PC and use that currency to buy something in game, does that cross over?
I believe so, as long as it's not platform exclusive. Like
Okay.
there are some on the. Speaking of PlayStation Plus, there's some PlayStation Plus exclusive skins. Those would not carry over. Otherwise, everything else
Okay.
does carry over.
So you could game the system and just be logging into your Xbox and PC to get the currency, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I've still paid them something, right? I
Right.
mean, it's.
But I guess then again, but I guess it works all the way around, right? Because if you buy currency on Switch and then buy something in game, theoretically it'll pop up on your Xbox and PC. So
Yep.
I guess
I
that
mean,
works.
I would say an example of that would be that by buying kind of the $5 welcome package, you get an intro animation for your character when you launch into the hunt, kind of like in Destiny where you kind of land with your ship, right? That I had it on Switch and I had it unlocked on Xbox, and so when I went to buy it again, I already had it, and so it was recognizing that I had it there from the other console.
Now,
The game it's go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the game itself. You know, Monster Hunter. I have tried to get into. Right, this is 2 years ago. A number of us took the Monster Hunter World kind of challenge of seeing if we could understand this beast of a game. I even came back to it later that year to give it another shake, and it just always felt too both gameplay wise too cumbersome and too kind of system heavy to kind of wade through to get something satisfying out of it. The action here is a little more button mashy in terms of the combat. You still have the same type of you've got some fast blades, you've got a bigger sword, you've got bigger axes, you've got some gun aspects. So there's a little more action to it, but it still has some of those dodge animations. You still have the ability to kind of counter and break somebody's charge. If you can time, they call it the. This is where I went down the rabbit hole as well, right? Where you can kind of boop somebody and interrupt their animation. So there's some complexity there, but it's not. It certainly felt more accessible. And then you're starting always in kind of what feels like an MMO hub world town with a variety of NPCs standing outside their associated buildings and a wanted board and things like that, and then you launch just directly into the game. Each hunt is kind of on a enclosed or segregated out island, so you're not kind of hunting through this interconnected world like you would be in Monster Hunter. Sometimes you find the creature, you get it to a certain damage level, and it'll go away and try to escape, and then you still have to find it on that island, but it's a little more confined. You do end up also that there's a
So so this is
go ahead.
this is a little or a lot more frameish too, right? In that it is predominantly PVE and co-op oriented, right?
Yes, it is all PVE and
Okay.
co-op oriented. I don't think there's any even type of PvP, uh, you know, battleground area. I mean, that certainly would be something that they could expand to, but again, this is very much in the PVE co-op. You're in a squad of four people. Most of the time it's random. I've had done it with headsets and without. I've played, on all three platforms, getting mixed in with people on each different platform. Uh, so yeah, you're kind of all tossed in there. You've got elemental weapons and damage, and they do that same type of buff or strength or weakness against certain type of creatures. And then it's the Monster Hunter aspect of you need X amount of scales or horn or something like that in order to be able to upgrade your weapon or armor. And so
So
uh,
also a little Horizon Zero Dawn-ish in that
yes,
aspect.
right. I mean, which also kind of comes from Monster Hunter in terms
Yeah.
of kind of farming some of those same hunts again and again to get the right crafting materials.
So now,
Um,
on the rundown, you have down that you played on Switch, Xbox One, and PC. Did you also play on PlayStation?
I did one hunt on PlayStation
Okay. So
just to see kind of graphic levels and things like that.
so across those, just out of curiosity, where would you say you encountered the most cooperative community?
I would say that uh, on, I mean, because if I'm playing with headsets, PC, Xbox, you had actual other people on with headsets. On Switch, I didn't play with a headset, so by the sheer nature of it, you almost have to be cooperative because everybody is, unless you're doing a low level, almost everybody's, you can't really, you could run off and farm some plants and other materials, but eventually the only thing you're doing in that world is is hunting the creature. Um,
It's
so I didn't find any toxicity at
uh,
this point.
it's amazing to me. So again, we I listened to the holiday episodes, and one of the things that we talked about was, hey, do we continue to ascribe the failure of the Xbox One to Don Matrick, maybe unfairly, that he's past his statute of limitations on when that crime should be ascribed to him. It's amazing to me, though, in similar fashion, that I feel like the legacy of the PlayStation 3 not having a headset packed in continues to pervade into this generation, as a general dynamic that most of the time on PlayStation, on the PSN, you encounter players with no headsets. Whereas on Xbox and especially on PC, of course, it seems like it is the norm and the expectation that you have a headset. That's just a weird gaming social dynamic that I find very curious.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Very true. So yeah, again, it was, I think, that long-term progression piece, that it does, it is more of a loop, right? That you're running similar battles again and again. I found myself, farming the same type of frost beast in order to get something. I fought it multiple times, but at the same time, I could switch up my weapons and get a different play experience. I tried a couple different weapon versions, but also that even by using the same weapon and figuring out how to counter, how to dodge at the right time, how to manage my stamina, that there were nuances there that I could find myself improving in, even though I was basically doing the same thing. And I would say as I'm doing it, I'm also thinking, oh, in Destiny for the last 5 years, I've run strikes over and over again in the same zones, in the same areas, knowing exactly, you know, what strategy to use. This is not drastically different. I'm running strikes hoping to get a purple drop, or to get enough to get to the next powerful gear. It's the same type of model here, and I could see why Destiny players, when Destiny 2 was at a lull, moved over to something like Monster Hunter, because there is some similarities in terms of that satisfaction that it provides. So that's some of my progression model. I've come back to in terms of a new release with also some progression, but we're getting close to the end of our time, so I want to give you the mic, Agasicles, and see what else you've been playing.
So, having finally come out of that swerve and figuring out who I am as a gamer, what I want to be when I grow up, which is just not the first time in this century that I've gone through that. My spreadsheet for this year has programming bias that is created to try and ensure that I make sure that I spend enough time in the various new games that I bought last year. Which is always a problem, which is why I pulled off of Shadow Tactics, because I was like, I need to spend time playing the games that I spent money on last year. The backlog is infinite. We're never going to get through that. I need to just like re-zero the baseline and just pick up from last year. So first thing that got teed up for me was MLB The Show 19, which was very interesting because we talked about that game in the Gaming Superlative show. The end of the year show is like, various like most fun game most likely to be played when sick. It came up a couple times in categories.
It's my game that I know I'm going to go back to this year
Right.
because it's a solid, really solid baseball game at the end of a generation.
Right. And we talked about some of the things that made me, get back on board. The Xbox Series X train and the PlayStation 5 train was, I hooked it up. I didn't realize that, and I have it hooked up in a streaming rig. Didn't realize that I'm pumping it through one of the cards I have that does 4K pass through. So I was like, oh no, I am watching this in 4K. This looks gorgeous. So, and like you said, plays incredibly well. So I'm playing my Kansas City Royals. I went back to that season. I'm trying to, I used to be obsessed about like playing every single inning of every game. So I'm trying to, I think you mentioned there's a way to set the games to be shorter, but I don't think I can do that now that I've started my franchise season already. So what I do is I basically play through 5 innings, and as long as there's not an issue that makes me want to stay through it, which, the other night I was streaming it and, several people came into the live stream and were watching, so I went ahead and stayed in the game. But generally, I play through the 5 innings and then I just let it simulate to the end. But I'm having a great time. I think I've tweaked it also to suit my playing style a little better, where one of the interesting choices I've made is because I'm better at pitching than I am at batting, I've left pitching on dynamic, but I've taken batting and base running and set that to veteran. And that seems to be balancing out a little bit better for me.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I kept batting at a static piece because I'm still learning even after multiple years of playing this.
Right.
Where pitching, I enjoy the dynamic aspect of it because it does. As I get better, it keeps the challenge going.
Yeah, I'm coming back to the game. I'm realizing like the umpire AI is so wonderfully coded that it feels so real. Like there are times where there are times I throw a pitch and I'm like, and I love that they're blatant about showing you that the umpires are programmed to kind of be human, like, because you can throw a pitch and you can go, it's clearly in the strike box, ump, but you called it a ball. Like, I've got the analytics right here.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I had a play the other night where I clearly threw a ball and the ump called it a strike, and like the batter for like the computer controlled team was all grousing at the umpire, and I was like, he's got a point, ump. I can't argue with it. I appreciate that you gave it to me, but so those kind of experiences just make the game, really wonderful to play through. I'm trying to churn. I'm still in spring training, so I'm trying to churn and get through into regular season. But I'm really having a blast. So
I'd be interested to know if you stick with that kind of playing the first 5 and then simming, or because that's a specific strategy, right? Because you're almost always, your starter's not really going to get too tired yet at that point, where rather than simming the first 3 or 4 innings and then playing, because then you get into you got to use your bullpen a little bit differently. It's a totally different strategy piece then.
Yeah, up until now, the way it's been working out is where I drop out and sim is basically I have the guy in the bullpen warmed up, and the AI will generally put that person, or maybe I may have even I think I've actually gone to the point where I have put that person on the mound, so that is kind of removed from the PC's hands, from the CPU AI's hands, and then it just has to play out, the closer. So it all depends. So I've only done it a couple of times. I struggled a little bit because I think you can actually, because my franchise season, the games are set to be about 45. It says 45 minutes. I'm guessing you can set it to be shorter, but I think in order to do that, I would have to restart my franchise. I haven't seen anywhere where I can go to the menu and change it mid-franchise.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure once you start your franchise, those settings are kind of locked.
Yeah.
I mean, other than maybe the difficulty, which you might be able to play with.
I mean, I've been through all of the option menus and I can't see a place to change it. And I'm like, I just don't have the constitution to weather starting the franchise all over again. Yeah. So I'll at least, play it through, some chunk of this season, and then maybe I might revisit it. But yeah,
I would encourage you, once you hit that point where you're feeling like, okay, I'm ready to step away or do something different with it, to look into the Arts to October mode, where you're kind of only they're either inserting you into certain situations or certain kind of key games through your season, so you're not trying to, get through all 180 some games.
Yeah, 162 or something like that. I
Yeah.
forget.
Yep.
Swiss informed us when I mentioned it in the holiday episode. So, but regardless, it's a good time. And again, it has me. It's starting to get me pumped up again. For the new console launches this season. It was weird. I believe that I did see on a launch list MLB The Show 21, and I was like, that's really weird. I say, well, but I can see them pulling that back for an earlier release to coincide with the new console launch. So I think that was from a leak. So it has yet to be, confirmed.
Sure.
But
Or if your launch window includes basically the entire quarter that you launch in,
yeah,
is possible as
yeah.
well. Right?
So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting.
All right. Any other games you want to talk about before we get ready to head out here?
No, that should be a wrap.
Okay. So my last game that I've just started to play, I'm only about 4 hours in, but even saying 4 hours in the podcast where we talked about dabbling and not spending a lot of time is saying something. So I started playing Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE Encore. There, I got the whole title out in one sentence. So this is the Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem Switch release of the Wii U port of an anime, very much an anime JRPG. Played it for the first hour the first night. I just got it this week through GameFly. Played it for the first hour and thought, okay, I get what this game is. I think I'm probably going to be able to send it back relatively soon. Last night I played it some more. 3 hours later, I'm into the second chapter at the boss of a big dungeon, and I figured out the puzzle in the dungeon and kind of trying to rush my way to the boss and get to the boss, and I'm 3 levels under leveled. So I think, okay, I died once. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try this again, different strategy. Died again. Now I'm at the point where it was also 1 o'clock at night. Back to oh yeah, I spent way too much time on this game. Um, so I need to grind a little bit and see. So yeah, I mean, it is. I can't say that I'm totally hooked on the story, but the battle mechanics, the combat, it's turn-based combat, but you have some kind of abilities to chain together your different characters in kind of a, depending on the type of attack, and if it's elementally strong or weak against an enemy, you may pull in your other characters to do a multiple attack, and so there's a little bit of a dynamic piece there, and so it's kept me engaged more than just kind of hitting a button and it, so at this point I'm enjoying it. We'll see if it hits that kind of like, okay, I get you, I'm going to send you back wall, or if I suddenly find myself um pulling a Swiss and diving headlong into some anime as well. So maybe on the next show I'll have a little bit more to talk about. So speaking of the next show, we've got next week on the E2KG network here on Enough to Keep Going. We are back with our deep dive episode. And then in 2 weeks from now, we'll be back with another Pixplay and Pixplay and Game Experience show. And somewhere in February, we're going to be looking back at the decade, looking at some trends, some games, spending some time looking backwards at just kind of what we started to do tonight in terms of revisiting some 2010 games, but looking back over the course of the decade and seeing where the trajectory of as you said, Agasicles, where the industry, where it's gone as a hobby, where it's gone as game culture, social experience as well. So please join us as we continue to do that, and I'm sure it'll be interesting to see how this last decade sets us up for the start of the new decade and the start of a new generation of content we've been talking about tonight as well. So for myself, DBqHams, and thank you, sir. Thank you, Agasicles, for the conversation. And it's good to touch base, and talk with you as well. So from all of us here on the E2KG network, thanks for joining us. Come back again next week. Until then, enjoy what you're playing, play with who you enjoy, and remember to be kind to all of those as well. Good night.